Some mistakes carry the weight of destiny. Sometimes what arrives unannounced is exactly what we need most. When 66-year-old horse trainer Bill Yates receives a wild stallion sent by mistake, he plans to send it right back. But the moment the animal steps off, the wagon eyes fierce, coat like black glass, something stirs deep in his chest. Days into working with the untamed horse, Bill discovers a hidden brand beneath the mane, his wife's initials. She died decades ago, and her prized bloodline was thought lost forever. This stallion is the last descendant of the horses they once raised together. What could a mistake like this mean for a man who thought his best days were behind him? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning frost settled heavy across the Montana Valley, turning the grass silver in the pale light. Bill Yates stood at his kitchen window with a cup of coffee gone lukewarm in his hand, watching the sun climb over the distant ridgeline the way he'd done for 23 years. Same window, same view. Different man entirely, his hands wrapped around the mug, weathered and scarred from decades of rope burns and horse bites. 76 years of living showed in those hands the last 10 spent mostly idle. He'd built calluses working with champions once. Now they were softening, becoming the hands of a man who watched more than he did. The kitchen was clean but sparse, a single plate in the drying rack. One chair pulled out from the table where he took his meals alone. The refrigerator hummed its familiar rhythm, decorated with nothing but a calendar from the feed store and a single photograph held by a magnet. Bill and Sarah, younger versions of themselves, standing beside a magnificent chestnut mare. The photo had faded to sepia tones, the edges curled with age. He'd stopped really looking at it years ago. It was just there, like the furniture, like the memories he kept at arm's length. Bill drained the last of his coffee and set the mug in the sink. Through the window above the basin, he could see his barn, once a thriving operation, now mostly empty. The paint had weathered to a dull red-gray. 2 of the paddock fences leaned at angles he kept meaning to fix. The property stretched out beyond, 40 acres of good grazing land that hadn't seen a breeding operation in over 2 decades. He pulled on his jacket, the heavy canvas one with Sarah's name still stitched on the inside pocket, and stepped outside. The cold bit at his face, sharp and clean. His breath made clouds in the morning air. His boots crunched across the frost-stiffened grass toward the barn. This had been their dream once, Yates quarter horses. They'd built something special here, bloodlines that went back 5 generations, horses known across 3 states for their intelligence and temperament. Sarah had the eye for breeding. She could look at a mare and a stallion and tell you what their offspring would be capable of before conception. Bill had the hands. He could train a horse to trust when others had given up, could read an animal's mind through the smallest shift in posture or ear position. Together, they'd been formidable. The barn door creaked as he pushed it open. Dust motes drifted through shafts of morning light. The place smelled of old hay and leather and memory. Only 3 stalls were occupied, now 2 retired geldings he kept for old friends who paid minimal board, and a paint mare recovering from a leg injury for Jenny Morrison, the veterinarian who'd taken over Doc Henderson's practice 5 years back. Bill ran his hand along the stall doors as he passed, feeling the grain of the wood. Each one had held champions once. Mares heavy with foals, stallions with fire in their blood. Now they stood empty, gathering shadows. He fed the 3 horses with practiced efficiency, checking water buckets and inspecting the paint's bandaged leg. The mare nickered softly as he worked, grateful for the attention. He'd always been good with injured animals. Something about his patience seemed to calm them. "You're healing up fine," he murmured to the mare, running his hand along her neck. "Jenny did good work on you. Another week, and you'll be ready to go home." The mare pushed her nose against his chest, and for a moment Bill felt something stir an echo of the passion he'd once carried for this work. Then it faded, settling back into the dull routine of maintenance and obligation. He finished up and walked back outside. The sun was higher now, burning off the frost. Across the road, he could see smoke rising from Tom Hendricks's chimney. Tom had been deputy marshal for the county for 30 years, lived alone since his wife passed, and stopped by Bill's place once a week like clockwork, mostly to make sure Bill was still breathing, Bill suspected. The sound of a truck engine made Bill turn. Speak of the devil! Tom's old Ford rattled up the drive, pulling to a stop near the barn. The door opened and Tom climbed out, moving with the careful deliberation of a man whose knees had started betraying him. "Morning, Bill." "Tom." They'd known each other long enough that words weren't always necessary. Tom walked over, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, breath steaming. He was a few years younger than Bill, still had most of his dark hair, though it had gone silver at the temples. "Cold one today," Tom said. "That it is. Jenny said you helped her with the Henderson mare last week. Said the foaling went smoother with you there." Bill shrugged. "Just held the mare steady. Jenny did the work. She said you knew there was a problem before she did. Said you heard something in the mare's breathing. Experience, that's all." Tom was quiet for a moment, studying him the way he studied suspect's patient, seeing more than Bill wanted him to. "You ever think about taking on more work? Jenny's always asking after you. Says she could use someone with your expertise. I help when she needs it. That's not what I mean, and you know it." Bill met his old friend's eyes. "What would be the point, Tom?" "The point would be you're 66, not 96. You've got good years ahead if you'd stop living like you're already in the ground next to Sarah." The name hung in the cold air between them. Bill felt his jaw tighten. "I'm doing fine. You're going through motions. There's a difference." "That so?" Tom sighed, his breath a long white plume. "I'm not trying to start a fight. I'm saying I remember when this place meant something to you, when you meant something to yourself." Bill looked away, toward the empty paddocks. "That was a long time ago. Doesn't have to be ancient history." They stood in silence. Finally, Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "All right, I'll leave you be. But I'm serious, Bill. Life's still happening whether you participate or not." He walked back to his truck, started the engine, and pulled away down the drive. Bill watched him go, feeling the familiar weight settle back onto his chest, the same weight that had been there since the day they buried Sarah under the cottonwood tree on the East Ridge. He turned back toward the house. The day stretched ahead, empty and predictable. Feed the horses, check fences, maybe drive into town for supplies, come home, eat alone, sit on the porch with whiskey and talk to ghosts. Sleep poorly, wake up, repeat. It wasn't living, not really, but it was safe. And safety was all Bill had left to hold on to. That afternoon, he drove into Stillwater, 15 miles of two-lane highway, cutting through ranch land and pine forest. The town hadn't changed much in 40 years. Same main street, same handful of businesses holding on by habit and stubbornness. The feed store sat on the corner where it had always been, a weathered building with a faded sign that read, "Morrison's Feed and Grain." Bill pulled into the gravel lot and killed the engine. Inside, the store smelled of molasses and burlap and wood shavings. Carlos Morrison stood behind the counter, reading glasses perched on his nose as he worked through an invoice. He looked up when the bell above the door chimed. "Bill Yates." "Right on schedule." "Carlos." "Same as always." "Same as always." Carlos moved with practiced efficiency, gathering 50-pound sacks of feed and stacking them on a dolly. He was younger than Bill by a decade, had inherited the store from his father, and remembered when the Yates operation had been the biggest customer on his books. "How's that paint mare doing?" Carlos asked as he worked. "Healing up good. Should be ready to go home next week. Jenny's lucky to have you around. Good horse sense is getting rare." Bill didn't respond. He watched Carlos work, the familiar rhythm of a man who knew his business. "You hear about the Thornton place?" Carlos asked, wheeling the dolly toward the door. "Can't say I have. Expanding their operation, bought up the old Reardon ranch, planning to bring in some fancy bloodlines from down south, quarter horses mostly, expensive ones." Bill felt a small twist in his chest. The Thornton Ranch was 3 hours south, run by a wealthy family who treated horses like investments rather than partners. They had money and land, but lacked the understanding that made good breeding work. "Good for them," Bill said flatly. Carlos loaded the feed into the truck bed, then stood back, wiping his hands on his apron. "You ever think about getting back into it? I know Tom's probably already bent your ear about it, but I'm saying it too. You've still got the gift, Bill. Shame to waste it. I appreciate the thought, but you're not interested." "I'm not interested." Carlos nodded slowly. "All right, but if you change your mind, you let me know. I've got customers asking after good trainers all the time. I'd be happy to send them your way." Bill paid in cash, climbed back into his truck, and headed home. The sun was starting its descent toward the mountains, painting the valley in shades of amber and gold. Sarah had loved this time of day. She'd called it the golden hour, when everything looked touched by grace. Back at the property, Bill unloaded the feed and stored it in the barn. The horses watched him with patient eyes, secure in their routines. He gave them each a pat, checked water levels one final time, and walked back to the house as dusk settled in. Dinner was simple, leftover stew heated on the stove, eaten at the kitchen table with the radio playing low. Afterwards, he washed his single bowl and spoon, dried them, put them away. The ritual of solitude. Then he did what he did every evening. He poured 2 fingers of whiskey into a glass, carried it out to the porch, and sat in the chair that faced west. The mountains were dark silhouettes against a sky turning purple and orange. "Another day, Sarah," he said quietly to the empty air. "Same as the last. Same as tomorrow will be." The whiskey burned, going down, familiar and sharp. He'd been having this one-sided conversation for 23 years. Sometimes he imagined her responses, what she'd say if she could. Mostly she'd tell him to stop feeling sorry for himself. She'd tell him he was wasting the life she didn't get to finish. She'd probably be right. In his wallet, tucked behind his driver's license, was the photograph Tom had given him after the funeral. Sarah, at their prime, standing beside their best mare, Storm Dancer. Her smile was radiant, her hand resting on the horse's neck with easy confidence. Bill had been beside her when the photo was taken, but Tom had cropped that version, just Sarah and the horse, the partnership that had defined her. Bill didn't look at it often. When he did, it hurt in ways he couldn't articulate. He finished his whiskey. As the stars began appearing, cold and distant, the night air carried the scent of pine and frost. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called. The world kept turning, indifferent to one old man's grief. Bill stood, joints protesting, and went inside. He locked the door, turned off the lights, and climbed the stairs to a bedroom that still felt too empty. Sleep would come eventually, restless and shallow, and tomorrow he'd wake up and do it all again. Because this was what life had become, not living, just continuing. One day after another, marking time until there was no more time to mark. He didn't know that everything was about to change. That fate was already in motion, carrying something toward him that would crack open the shell he'd built around his heart. Sometimes destiny doesn't wait for permission. Sometimes it simply arrives at your door, wild and untamed, refusing to be turned away. The phone rang at 7 in the morning, shattering the quiet. Bill had been up for an hour already, nursing his coffee and staring at nothing in particular. He picked up the receiver on the 4th ring. "Yates. Mr. Yates? This is Danny from Crossroads Freight. I've got a delivery for you this morning. Should be there within the hour. Just wanted to give you a heads up." Bill frowned. "I didn't order anything. Says here William Yates, Route 7, Stillwater." "That you?" "That's me, but I'm telling you, I didn't order anything." "Well, we've got the paperwork. Horse transport. Should be there around 8. The line went dead before Bill could protest further. He stood holding the phone, confusion turning to annoyance. A horse? He'd made it clear to everyone that he wasn't taking on new animals. Whatever this was, it was a mistake, and mistakes needed correcting. By the time the transport truck rumbled up his drive at 8:15, Bill had worked himself into a quiet frustration. He walked out to meet it, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, jaw set. The truck was a proper horse trailer, professional operation, the kind used for moving valuable animals. A young driver climbed down from the cab, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Yates, that's me, and I'm telling you right now, whatever you've got in that trailer isn't mine. You've got the wrong address." The driver checked his paperwork, frowning. "William Yates, Route 7? That's me, but I didn't order any horse." "Well, someone did. We picked him up from a breeder outside Billings 3 days ago. Supposed to be delivered here." He flipped through pages. "Payment's been made. Everything's in order. Then everything's wrong. Who's the shipper?" Thornton Ranch, looks like. Down in—" "I know where Thornton Ranch is," Bill cut in. "And I'm telling you, they don't do business with me. You need to check your addresses. This horse is probably supposed to be delivered to them, not from them." The driver scratched his head, studying the manifest. "That would make more sense. Big operation like that. Let me make a call." While the driver walked away with his cell phone, Bill heard movement from inside the trailer, a heavy stamp, the metallic ring of a hoof striking the floor. Then another sound, a low, powerful exhalation that carried weight and warning. Despite himself, Bill's curiosity stirred. He walked closer to the trailer, peering through the slats. What he saw made him stop breathing. The horse inside was magnificent. A stallion, black as midnight, 17 hands at least. His coat gleamed even in the shadows of the trailer, like polished obsidian. But it was the eyes that caught Bill, fierce, intelligent, burning with something between rage and pain. This wasn't a horse accustomed to confinement. This was wild spirit barely contained. The stallion sensed Bill's presence and turned his massive head, fixing those eyes directly on him. They regarded each other through the slats, man and animal, measuring, assessing. Bill felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. Recognition, maybe, or possibility. The driver came back, shaking his head. "Can't get through to the office. But you're probably right. This is likely meant for Thornton Ranch, couple 100 miles south. I can take him back. Get it sorted." Bill should have agreed immediately. Should have signed whatever needed signing and watched the trailer disappear down his drive. Should have returned to his quiet routine. Instead, he heard himself say, "Give me 48 hours. Sir, to verify the mix-up. Make sure the paperwork's straight. I don't want this animal bouncing around the state because someone can't read an address. Give me 2 days. I'll confirm where he's supposed to go, and you can come back for him then." The driver looked uncertain. "I don't know if I can. You've already driven him 3 days. Another 2 won't matter. And if I'm housing him, I want to make sure he's going to the right place. I'm not sending him off to another wrong destination." It was a flimsy argument, and they both knew it. But something in Bill's tone, the quiet authority of a man who'd spent 50 years working with horses, made the driver nod. "All right, 48 hours. But I need you to sign that you're taking temporary custody." Bill signed. The driver opened the trailer ramp, and Bill got his first full look at the stallion in daylight. The animal was even more impressive outside the trailer's confines. Pure black, except for one white sock on the rear left leg. Powerful shoulders, clean lines, the build of a runner combined with the strength of a warhorse. But it was the bearing that struck Bill most. This horse carried himself like royalty who'd been wrongly imprisoned. The stallion came down the ramp with controlled power, head high, nostrils flaring as he took in his new surroundings. Every muscle was coiled, ready. One wrong move, and he'd explode into violence. "Easy," Bill murmured, not moving. "Easy. Now." The stallion's ears swiveled toward his voice. Those fierce eyes found him again, holding steady. Bill remained perfectly still, letting the horse process his presence, his scent, his intention. This was the first rule of working with spirited animals. Let them come to their own conclusions. Force accomplished nothing. The driver backed the truck away slowly, and suddenly Bill was alone with 1,000 pounds of barely restrained wildness. "All right then," Bill said quietly. "Let's get you settled." He didn't reach for a lead rope, didn't make any sudden movements. He simply turned and walked toward the barn, trusting instinct over reason. Behind him, he heard the stallion's hooves on gravel, The horse was following not because he was led, but because he chose to. Bill opened the door to the largest stall, the one that had housed their prize stallion, Thunder's Echo, 30 years ago. The stallion walked in without hesitation, immediately investigating the space with the thoroughness of a tactician assessing terrain. Bill filled the water bucket and put fresh hay in the feeder. The stallion ignored both, more interested in establishing boundaries and testing limits. He paced the stall's perimeter, powerful and restless. "I know," Bill said softly. "This isn't where you want to be, but it's where you are for now. Might as well make the best of it." He left the stall, secured it, and stepped back to observe. The stallion came to the front, gripping the top rail with his teeth not chewing, just holding, as if contemplating whether he could break through if he tried hard enough. Bill found himself smiling, the first genuine smile in longer than he could remember. There was something about this animal, something that called to the part of him he thought had died with Sarah. Over the next hours, Bill watched the stallion settle into an uneasy truce with captivity. The horse finally drank, finally ate, but never fully relaxed, always vigilant, always ready. As afternoon arrived, Bill decided to do what he should have done immediately: check the animal for identification. He entered the stall slowly, speaking in low, steady tones. The stallion watched him with those burning eyes but didn't retreat or attack. A good sign. Bill ran his hands over the powerful neck, feeling for microchips or brands. Nothing. He checked the flanks, the shoulders. Still nothing. Then, almost absently, he lifted the thick black mane. There, hidden beneath the waterfall of hair, was a brand. Small, deliberate, expertly done. 3 letters, S-M-Y. Sarah Marie Yates. Bill's hands went numb. The world tilted sideways. He stared at those letters, branded into this magnificent animal's hide, and felt 23 years of carefully maintained distance shatter like glass. It couldn't be. The bloodline had been sold off, dispersed to a dozen different ranches after Sarah died. He'd watched it happen, too grief-stricken to fight the buyers who'd descended like vultures. Their legacy divided and scattered because he hadn't had the strength to carry it forward alone. But here was proof, undeniable, permanent. This stallion carried Sarah's mark, which meant somewhere in his lineage, somehow, her bloodline had survived, had continued, had produced this magnificent creature who now stood in the same barn where his ancestors had been born. Bill backed out of the stall on unsteady legs. He walked outside, the spring air suddenly too thin to breathe properly. His heart hammered against his ribs, his vision blurred at the edges. A mistake, the freight company had said. Wrong address. But Bill had stopped believing in coincidences the day Sarah died. The universe didn't work on random chance. It worked on threads of connection too subtle to see until they pulled taut. This horse, this impossible descendant of everything he'd lost, had been sent to him. Not by accident, not by mistake, by fate. Bill looked back at the barn, where the black stallion stood in the stall that had once housed his great-great-grandfather. The animal was watching him through the open door, those fierce eyes holding questions Bill didn't have answers for. "What are you doing here?" Bill whispered to the wind, to the universe, to Sarah's ghost. "What am I supposed to do with this?" The stallion pawed the ground once, a sharp crack of hoof against concrete, impatient, demanding, alive. And for the first time in 23 years, Bill Yates felt something beyond the numbness, not happiness, not yet, but something closer to purpose, closer to the man he used to be. The past had arrived at his door, wild and unbroken, and Bill realized with crystal clarity that he had a choice to make: send it away and continue his slow fade into nothing, or accept what had been delivered to him and face everything he'd been running from. He walked back into the barn. The stallion's ears pricked forward. "All right," Bill said quietly. "You're staying, at least until I figure out what this means." The horse snorted, whether in agreement or contempt. Bill couldn't tell. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, tomorrow felt like it might be different from today, and that terrified him more than anything had in years. Bill didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through memories he'd locked away for decades. Sarah's face when they'd bought their first breeding mare. The sound of her laugh when a foal took its first wobbly steps. The way she'd run her hands over a horse's flank, reading its potential like others read books. The brand kept appearing in his mind's eye. S.M.Y. Her initials, her mark, her legacy stamped into an animal that shouldn't exist. At dawn, he gave up on sleep and went to the barn. The stallion was awake, standing alert in his stall as if he'd been waiting. Their eyes met through the dim light, and Bill felt that same electric recognition from yesterday. This wasn't going to be a simple matter of care and feeding. This horse demanded more. "Morning," Bill said, his voice rough from disuse and emotion. "Suppose we should figure out what to call you. Can't just keep saying horses or stallion." The animal watched him with those intelligent eyes, ears forward, tracking every movement. Bill thought for a moment, then nodded to himself. "Shadow, that's what I'll call you, for now anyway, until I figure out who you really are." Shadow, the name felt right. This horse was a shadow of the past, a dark reflection of everything Bill had tried to leave behind. He spent the morning doing the basic work, fresh water, good feed, mucking the stall. Shadow tolerated his presence but maintained a careful distance, neither aggressive nor welcoming. Testing, assessing, deciding whether this human was worth trusting. Bill understood. Trust was earned, not given, especially when you'd been betrayed before. By mid-morning, Tom's truck appeared in the drive. Bill met him outside the barn, not particularly wanting company but not surprised by it either. "Heard you took in a horse," Tom said, climbing out. Carlos mentioned the freight company called him, looking for confirmation on the address. "News travels fast. It's a small town." Tom studied him carefully. "So, what's the story?" "Delivery mistake. Horse was supposed to go to Thornton Ranch. I'm keeping him for a couple days until they sort it out." "That's so." Tom's expression said he didn't quite believe the simple explanation. "Can I see him?" They walked into the barn together. Shadow stood at the front of his stall, magnificent and imposing. Tom let out a low whistle. "That's some animal. What's he worth?" "I don't know. Haven't looked into it, but you kept him instead of sending him back immediately." Bill didn't answer. Tom waited, patient as always, until Bill finally said, "He's got Sarah's brand." The words hung heavy in the barn's silence. Tom's eyebrows rose. "Her brand? But that's impossible." "I know. I sold off the entire line after she died, watched every horse go to different buyers. The bloodline was scattered across 4 states. Bill's voice was tight. But there it is. Her initials, clear as day, hidden under his mane. Tom moved closer to the stall. Shadow shifted, watching him but not retreating. "Can I see?" "You can try." Tom approached slowly, speaking softly the way anyone who knew horses should. Shadow allowed him near, tolerated his touch. Tom lifted the mane and went very still. "S.M.Y., he breathed. "Bill, this is something. I know what it is. Do you? Because this isn't just coincidence. This is—" "I said I know what it is." Bill's voice came out harder than intended. He softened it. "I just don't know what it means yet." Tom stepped back from the stall, his eyes full of the same concern Bill had seen there for 2 decades. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to figure out where he came from, how this bloodline survived, then I'll decide." "Decide what?" "What happens next?" They stood in silence, watching Shadow move around his stall with restless energy. Finally, Tom said, "Sarah would want you to keep him. You know that. Sarah's not here to want anything. Maybe she is, in a way." Bill didn't respond. Tom clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of support that needed no words, and left. Bill remained in the barn, staring at the stallion who'd upended his carefully maintained distance from the past. That afternoon, Jenny Morrison arrived to check on the paint mare. She was a competent veterinarian, early 40s, with the kind of practical wisdom that came from growing up around ranches. She'd been asking Bill for consultation work for years. He'd always declined. She noticed Shadow immediately. "Who's this?" she asked. approaching the stall with professional interest. New arrival. Temporary. He's magnificent. She studied Shadow with an expert eye. Quarter horse? The bill's right, but there's something else in there. Thoroughbred, maybe? He's got that fire. Could be. Jenny glanced at him, catching the evasion in his tone. Where'd he come from? Long story. I've got time. Bill hesitated, then found himself telling her about the delivery mistake, about finding Sarah's brand. Jenny listened without interrupting, her expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. That's remarkable, she said finally. The chances of that happening are astronomical. I know. What are you going to do with him? It was the question everyone seemed to be asking, and Bill still didn't have an answer. Work with him, I suppose. For now. Work with him, how? Bill looked at Shadow, at the barely contained energy and intelligence radiating from the animal. He needs training, proper training. He's spirited but not vicious, smart but not broken. Someone started him wrong or didn't finish the job. Could you do it? Finish the training? The question hit deeper than Jenny probably intended. Could he? Once, it would have been second nature. He'd trained dozens of spirited horses, had a reputation for seeing past the wildness to the potential underneath. But that was before Sarah. Before he'd packed away everything that made him who he was. I don't know, he said honestly. Jenny checked the paint mare, declared her ready to go home in a few days, and lingered by Shadow's stall before leaving. For what it's worth, Bill, I think this horse found the right person, even if it was by accident. After she left, Bill stood alone with Shadow. The afternoon sun slanted through the barn windows, painting golden stripes across the concrete floor. The stallion had settled slightly, no longer pacing, but still vigilant, still waiting. All right, Bill said quietly. You want to know if I'm worth your time? Let's find out. He opened the stall door and stepped inside. Shadow's ears flattened slightly, not full aggression but clear warning. Bill kept his movement slow, deliberate, non-threatening. He didn't reach out, didn't push into the horse's space. Just stood there, present but not demanding. They regarded each other in the filtered sunlight, man and animal, both carrying scars, both holding something back. After a long moment, Shadow took a single step forward, just one, close enough that Bill could have touched him if he'd reached out. But Bill didn't move. This was Shadow's choice to make. The stallion's nostrils flared, taking in Bill's scent. His ears moved forward slightly, the angle of wariness softening to curiosity. Then, with deliberate slowness, Shadow lowered his massive head and exhaled a long, warm breath across Bill's chest. It was the smallest gesture, but in the language of horses, it meant everything. Acceptance, tentative trust, willingness to try. Bill felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 23 years. His hand moved of its own accord, coming to rest on Shadow's powerful neck. The horse didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Okay, Bill whispered, his voice catching. Okay, then. They stood like that for several minutes, connected by nothing more than touch and mutual understanding. The barn was quiet around them, holding the moment like a precious thing. Finally, Bill stepped back. Shadow watched him go. Something different in those fierce eyes now, not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of it. As Bill left the barn, he realized he'd made a decision without consciously choosing. He wasn't sending Shadow back. Whatever this was, fate, coincidence, or Sarah's ghost reaching across death, he was going to see it through. For the first time in decades, Bill Yates had something to wake up for beyond mere routine, and it terrified him almost as much as it exhilarated him. The next morning, Bill woke before dawn with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, he wasn't ready for that yet, but purpose, direction, something beyond the hollow routine of survival. He made coffee, drank it, standing at the kitchen window, watching the valley lighten, and was in the barn by the time the sun cleared the mountains. Shadow was awake, as if he'd been waiting. The stallion's eyes tracked Bill's movements with that same intense intelligence. Bill had spent half the night thinking about approach, about method, about how to work with an animal this spirited without breaking what made him special. Sarah would have known instinctively. She'd had the gift of reading horses the way some people read books, understanding not just what they were, but what they could become. Bill had always been the implementer, taking Sarah's insights and turning them into reality through patient, methodical training. Without her, he'd have to be both. "Morning, Shadow," Bill said, approaching the stall. "Today we're going to have a conversation. You're going to tell me your story, and I'm going to listen." He opened the stall door and entered with nothing but a lead rope coiled over his shoulder. Shadow shifted his weight, not quite stepping back, but making it clear he was reserving judgment. Bill stood still, waiting. This was the foundation of everything, teaching a horse that presence didn't equal threat. That proximity could be neutral, even beneficial. Rush this part and you built a relationship on fear. Take your time and you built something lasting. Minutes passed. Shadow's ears swiveled, tracking sounds from outside birds, wind in the eaves, the distant rumble of a truck on the highway. But his eyes never left Bill. Finally, the stallion took a step forward, then another. Close enough now that Bill could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to strike if he chose. Bill reached out slowly, palm flat, letting Shadow sniff his hand. The horse's nostrils flared, taking in information, scent, intent, history. Whatever he found there must have satisfied something, because Shadow allowed Bill's hand to rest against his jaw. "Good," Bill murmured. "That's good." He ran his hand along Shadow's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the glossy coat. This was a horse bred for stamina and strength. With bloodlines that went back to the foundation stock Sarah had spent decades cultivating. Somewhere in Shadow's ancestry were horses Bill had helped train, foals he'd watched being born. The connection felt sacred somehow, a thread linking past to present. Bill worked for an hour, just touching, building trust through repetition and calm presence. He checked Shadow's hooves, ran his hands over every inch of his body, looking for old injuries or problem areas. The stallion tolerated it all with growing patience, his initial wariness fading into something closer to acceptance. There was an old injury on the left, front leg healed but poorly. Someone had worked him too hard before the bone had properly set. Bill's jaw tightened. Whoever had owned Shadow before hadn't understood what they had. They'd seen value in dollar signs rather than partnership. "Somebody treated you rough," Bill said quietly, his fingers gentle on the old brake. "That's done now. Whatever happened before, it's finished." Shadow turned his head to look at Bill, and in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. They'd both been damaged, both carried scars. Maybe that's why fate had brought them together. By the time Bill left the stall, his shirt was soaked with sweat, despite the cool morning air. Building trust was exhausting work, both physically and emotionally, but it was good exhaustion, the kind that came from effort that mattered. He spent the afternoon making calls, trying to trace Shadow's lineage. The breeder outside Billings had closed their operation 2 years ago. The Thornton Ranch hadn't ordered any stallion. Every lead ended in disconnection or confusion. It was as if Shadow had materialized from nowhere, carrying Sarah's brand like a message from beyond. Tom stopped by that evening, found Bill in the barn, brushing Shadow with long, steady strokes. The stallion stood calm now, enjoying the attention, a dramatic shift from the barely contained wildness of 2 days ago. "That's progress," Tom observed, leaning against the stall door. "He's a quick learner, smart as they come. How's it feel? Working with a horse again, I mean." Bill continued brushing, considering the question honestly. "Like putting on an old coat that still fits. Familiar. But different too. Heavier, maybe. Because of Sarah. Everything's because of Sarah. She's the reason this horse has her brand. The reason I know what I'm doing. The reason it hurts to do it." Tom was quiet for a moment. "You know what I think? I think she sent him to you." Bill's hands stilled on the brush. "That's not how the world works. Maybe it is. Maybe there are things we don't understand. Connections that don't break just because someone dies." Tom's voice was gentle. "I've been checking in on you for 23 years, Bill. I've watched you shut down, shut out, shut off everything that made you who you were. And I've waited, hoping something would break through. And you think this horse is that something? I think this horse is giving you permission to be yourself again. Whatever the mechanism, fate, coincidence, divine intervention, does it really matter? He's here. You're working with him. And for the first time since Sarah died, you look like you're actually living instead of just existing. Bill resumed brushing, his throat tight. It's not that simple. It never is. But it could be the start. After Tom left, Bill stayed in the barn until dark, working with Shadow, talking to him the way he used to talk to horses in the old days, telling stories, sharing the day's thoughts, building the kind of bond that transcended species. Sarah would have loved you, he said, running his hand down Shadow's powerful shoulder. She'd have known exactly what to do with you. Me? I'm just making it up as I go. Shadow turned his head and nuzzled Bill's chest, a gesture of affection that nearly undid him. That night, Bill sat on the porch with his whiskey, but for the first time in years, he didn't need it to face the darkness. He poured it out on the ground, instead a libation for ghosts and new beginnings. I don't know what you're trying to tell me, Sarah, he said to the stars, but I'm listening now. I'm finally listening. The wind carried the scent of pine and possibility. Somewhere in the barn, Shadow was settling into sleep, no longer a stranger in a strange place, but something more, a companion, a challenge, a second chance wrapped in black hide and fierce eyes. Bill sat until the cold drove him inside, and when he finally climbed the stairs to bed, sleep came easier than it had in decades. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time since Sarah died, Bill Yates went to bed feeling something beyond resignation. He went to bed feeling hope, and hope, he was discovering, was both a gift and a burden. It asked things of you. It demanded you show up. It refused to let you hide in the comfortable numbness of grief. Shadow had brought more than himself when he arrived at Bill's door. He'd brought the future. And the future, Bill was learning, didn't wait patiently for permission. It simply arrived and asked if you were brave enough to meet it. A week passed, then two. Bill fell into a rhythm he hadn't known in decades, rising with purpose, spending hours in the barn with Shadow, falling into bed exhausted and satisfied. The Stallion was proving everything Bill had suspected, intelligent beyond measure, responsive to patient guidance, capable of extraordinary partnership when given trust instead of domination. But the bond brought complications. The first came in the form of a phone call from Thornton Ranch. Bill was in the barn when his cell phone rang, Shadow standing calm beside him as he cleaned hooves. "Mr. Yates, this is Gerald Thornton. I believe you have a stallion that belongs to me." Bill's hand tightened on the hoofpick. "That so?" The freight company finally tracked down the paperwork error. "That black stallion should have been delivered to my facility 2 weeks ago. I've paid good money for that animal, and I expect him here by end of week." "Where'd you buy him from?" "That's not your concern. I have legal ownership, and I'm giving you courtesy notice that I'll be sending transport to collect him." "Tell me about his lineage." There was a pause. "Again, not your concern. But if you must know, he's from premium quarter-horse stock, championship bloodlines, worth over $50,000. So you can understand my urgency in recovering him." Bill straightened, his jaw tight. "He's got a brand, SMY. You know what that stands for?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'm not familiar with every marking on every horse I purchase. Now, will you have him ready for transport, or do I need to involve the authorities?" "I'll have him ready," Bill said, the words tasting like ash. He ended the call and stood staring at Shadow, who gazed back with those knowing eyes. 3 days. That's all he had left. The realization hit harder than Bill expected. He'd known this was temporary, had told himself that from the beginning. But somewhere in the daily work of building trust, of watching Shadow transform from wary and wild to responsive and engaged, Bill had forgotten the stallion wasn't his to keep. Shadow nickered softly, sensing the shift in Bill's mood. Bill ran his hand down the powerful neck, feeling the pulse of life beneath the surface. "Looks like our time's running out," he said quietly. That afternoon, Jenny stopped by to check on the paint mare, who was fully healed and ready to return home. She found Bill in the paddock, working shadow on a long lead line. The stallion moved with fluid grace, responding to subtle cues with the precision of a dancer. "He's beautiful," Jenny said, watching from the fence. "Look at that gait. Perfect balance. His owner's coming for him in 3 days." Jenny turned to look at him. "The Thornton Ranch? That's right. Are you going to let him go?" The question hung in the spring air. Bill brought Shadow to a halt, the stallion standing quiet beside him, breathing easily. "Don't have much choice. Thornton has legal ownership, papers and everything, but the brand doesn't change the legal reality. This horse belongs to someone else. Always has." Jenny studied him carefully. "Bill, in the 2 weeks since this horse arrived, I've watched you come back to life. You're different, present in a way you haven't been in years. Are you really going to just give that up?" "I gave it up 23 years ago. Shadow was just a reminder of what I used to have. Reminders end. That's their nature. That's grief talking, not wisdom." Bill met her eyes. "Maybe grief is the only wisdom I've got left." Jenny sighed, shaking her head. "For what it's worth, I think you're making a mistake, but it's your mistake to make." After she left, Bill worked with Shadow until dark, teaching him things the stallion wouldn't need, but Bill needed to give refinements of communication, subtleties of response, the kind of training that took a good horse and made him exceptional. Shadow absorbed it all like he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to teach him properly. Every session revealed new dimensions to his intelligence. He wasn't just learning commands, he was learning to think, to anticipate, to partner rather than simply obey. It made the approaching separation even harder. That evening, Tom appeared with a bottle of decent whiskey and 2 glasses. They sat on the porch in the gathering dark, watching stars emerge overhead. "Heard about Thornton?" Tom said, pouring generous measures. "News travels. You could fight it. The brand gives you a claim. Sarah's mark means something. Legally, probably not. And even if it did, what am I going to do? Start a breeding operation at 66? Take on the work Sarah and I used to do together? I'm not that man anymore, Tom." "You could be." Bill drank, the whiskey burning its familiar path. "Even if I wanted to, which I'm not saying I do, I don't have the resources. Thornton's got money, lawyers, infrastructure. I've got 40 acres and memories. You've got skill, experience, a gift that most people never develop. I had those things." Past tense. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You remember what Sarah used to say? About horses teaching us what we need to learn?" Bill remembered. Sarah had believed every horse that came into their lives had a purpose, a lesson embedded in the relationship. She'd say it with such conviction that Bill had learned to look for those lessons, even when they were hard to see. "What do you think Shadow's teaching you?" Tom asked. "That some things are borrowed, not owned. That second chances have expiration dates. That the past is exactly that past. Or maybe he's teaching you that it's never too late to start again. That legacy doesn't die just because someone does. That what we build together doesn't end when we're separated." Bill didn't respond. The words cut too close to truths he wasn't ready to face. They sat in silence, drinking steadily, until Tom finally stood to leave. At the door of his truck, he turned back. "You know what I think, Bill? I think you're scared. And I don't blame you. Opening yourself up again after 23 years of being closed off, that takes courage most people don't have. But hiding behind legal ownership and practical limitations, that's the coward's way out. And you're not a coward. Never have been." The truck's taillights disappeared down the drive. Bill sat alone with his whiskey and his thoughts, feeling the weight of choices he didn't want to make. Inside the barn, Shadow was settling into sleep, unaware that his days here were numbered. Bill envied him that ignorance. The horse lived entirely in the present, responding to what was, rather than worrying about what might be. Maybe that was the real lesson. Not about legacy or second chances or any of the poetic interpretations people wanted to attach to fate's accidents. Maybe it was simpler be present in the time you have, because that's all anyone ever gets. Bill finished his whiskey and went to the barn one final time. Shadow came to the stall door, greeting him with a soft nicker. Bill rested his forehead against the stallion's jaw, breathing in the warm scent of horse and hay. 3 more days, he whispered. Let's make them count. Shadow's only answer was the steady rhythm of his breathing, constant, present, untroubled by the future. Bill stayed there for a long time, holding on to a connection he knew he'd have to release. The night deepened around them, full of things left unsaid and choices left unmade. Tomorrow would come regardless, and with it, the slow countdown to goodbye. The next morning brought rain, cold, steady, the kind that turned the valley grey and made the world feel smaller. Bill stood at the kitchen window watching water run down the glass in silver streams, his coffee forgotten in his hand. 2 days left. The thought sat heavy in his chest, making it hard to breathe properly. He'd spent decades teaching himself not to feel too much, not to want things he couldn't have. But Shadow had cracked that careful armor, and now emotions leaked through grief, anger, longing, regret. He pulled on his rain jacket and went to the barn. Shadow greeted him with his usual enthusiasm, unbothered by the weather, eyes bright with intelligence and something that looked almost like affection. Bill had seen that look before, in horses that had bonded deeply with their handlers. It was trust, pure and complete. It made what was coming even harder. "Morning," Bill said, entering the stall. Shadow pressed his head against Bill's chest, and Bill wrapped his arms around the powerful neck, holding on perhaps a moment too long. They worked through the morning despite the rain, Bill teaching Shadow advanced cues, the kind that required absolute trust between horse and rider. Shadow absorbed everything with that remarkable intelligence, performing complex maneuvers with barely a touch of guidance. "You're going to make someone very happy," Bill said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "Thornton's going to have himself a hell of a horse. Probably won't appreciate what he's got, but that's not my problem anymore." Shadow's ears swiveled back at the tone, picking up the emotion underneath the words. Jenny arrived around noon, ostensibly to drop off paperwork for the paint mare, but really, Bill suspected, to check on him. She found him in the barn, sitting on a hay bale, watching Shadow investigate a new pile of fresh straw. "You look terrible," she said without preamble. "Thank you for that assessment. I'm serious. When's the last time you slept?" Bill shrugged. He'd spent most of last night in the barn, unwilling to waste precious remaining hours on something as mundane as sleep. Jenny sat beside him, her expression concerned. "Bill, I need to tell you something. I did some research, called some people I know in the breeding community. About Shadow's lineage, about Sarah's bloodline." Bill turned to look at her. "What did you find?" "After you sold off the stock following Sarah's death, most of it went to various ranches across the region. But there was one buyer who acquired several of your best mares, a private breeder named Marcus Webb. He operated out of Billings until about 3 years ago. Kept the bloodline pure, bred specifically for temperament and intelligence over speed or show quality." "Webb," Bill repeated. The name meant nothing to him. He died last year. His operation was liquidated, stock sold off to various buyers. Shadow would have been part of that sale. Jenny paused. "Bill, Marcus Webb was Sarah's cousin. Did you know that?" The world tilted. Bill gripped the edge of the hay bale, his knuckles white. "What? Her cousin? They weren't close, I gather. There was some family dispute years back. But he remembered Sarah's work, respected what she'd built. When he had the chance to acquire the bloodline, he took it, and he maintained it, kept it pure and focused exactly the way Sarah would have wanted." Bill couldn't speak. His mind was reeling, connecting pieces he hadn't known existed. Sarah had a cousin. That cousin had secretly preserved her legacy, had continued her work in the shadows while Bill had abandoned everything. "There's more," Jenny said gently. "According to the records I found, Shadow isn't just from Sarah's bloodline. He's the culmination of it. Webb spent 15 years selectively breeding for specific traits, Shadow represents the absolute best of what Sarah was trying to achieve: intelligence, temperament, strength, and spirit in perfect balance. Why didn't anyone tell me? Webb died suddenly. No family to inherit. His estate went to probate, and everything was auctioned off to cover debts. Shadow went to a commercial breeder who didn't understand what they had. That breeder sold him to Thornton. And somewhere in the chain of paperwork, an address got transposed. Bill stood abruptly, pacing the barn. Shadow watched him with alert eyes, sensing the agitation. So this horse Shadow, he's not just connected to Sarah's work, he is her work, the culmination of everything she dreamed of. Yes, and in 2 days, he goes to a man who sees him as an investment, a commodity, something to breed for profit rather than purpose. Jenny didn't answer. She didn't need to. Bill walked to Shadow's stall. The stallion came to him immediately, pressing his forehead against Bill's chest in that gesture of trust and affection that had become their ritual. Bill closed his eyes, feeling the solid warmth of the animal, the steady heartbeat beneath muscle and bone. Sarah knew, he whispered. She knew what she was building. She had a vision, and somehow, impossibly, it survived her. It survived me giving up. It survived being scattered and sold and passed through hands that didn't understand, and it ended up here, with me, after 23 years. That's not coincidence, Jenny said quietly. That's something else. Something bigger. Bill opened his eyes, looking at Shadow, really looking. This wasn't just a horse, this was Sarah's ghost made flesh, her vision realized. Her legacy, walking and breathing and trusting him with those fierce, intelligent eyes. And he was going to let it go. Was going to stand by while everything Sarah had worked for went to someone who'd never understand its value. What do I do? The question came out broken, raw. Jenny stood, walked over to join him. That's not for me to answer. But I'll tell you this. Sarah didn't spend decades building this bloodline so it could end up as some rich man's trophy. And you didn't survive 23 years of grief just to give up now when it matters most. I don't have the resources to fight Thornton. Maybe not, but you have something he doesn't. You have the knowledge, the skill, the understanding of what this horse represents, and you have the right moral, if not legal, to protect Sarah's legacy. Bill stood in silence, his hand resting on Shadow's neck, feeling the pulse of life beneath his palm. The rain drummed steadily on the barn roof. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was building, both outside and within. I'm 66 years old, he said finally. I'm tired. I'm alone. I don't know if I have the strength to do what you're suggesting. Then find it, Jenny said simply, because that horse is counting on you. And somewhere, I think Sarah is too. She left him there, alone with Shadow and impossible choices. Bill stayed in the barn as the storm intensified, thunder shaking the rafters, rain pounding like drums. Shadow remained calm through it all, trusting in Bill's presence, unbothered by the chaos outside. That trust felt like both a gift and an accusation. I failed her once, Bill said to the stallion. Gave up everything we built because I couldn't face it without her. I won't fail her again. I can't. Shadow's only response was a soft exhale, acceptance, understanding, partnership. Bill walked to the barn entrance and stared out at the storm-darkened valley. Lightning flickered in the clouds. Rain fell in sheets, washing everything clean. Tomorrow, Thornton's transport would arrive. Tomorrow, Bill would have to make a choice, surrender Shadow to legal ownership, or fight for something that felt bigger than law, bigger than property rights, bigger than his own fear and exhaustion. The storm raged. And somewhere in Bill's chest, something long dormant began to wake, not hope this time, but something fiercer, determination. The past had delivered him a second chance. And maybe, just maybe, he was finally ready to take it. Bill didn't leave the barn that night. He pulled an old blanket from the tack room, settled onto a hay bale in the aisle, and kept vigil while Shadow dozed in his stall. Sleep came in fragments, disrupted by dreams of Sarah and horses and roads not taken. Around 3 in the morning, he woke fully, his back aching, his mind sharp with clarity that only arrives in the deep hours. He stood, stretched, and wandered to the back of the barn, where old filing cabinets held decades of paperwork he'd never been able to throw away. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, just a feeling, a pull toward something he'd forgotten or overlooked. He opened drawers at random, pulling out folders thick with breeding records, sale receipts, veterinary files. His and Sarah's entire operation documented and archived. In the third cabinet, bottom drawer, he found a box he didn't remember storing, plain cardboard taped shut, covered in dust. His heart started beating faster as he carried it to the workbench and cut through the old tape. Inside were Sarah's personal notebooks, the ones she'd kept separate from official records. Her private thoughts on breeding strategy, observations about bloodlines, dreams for the future. Bill had boxed them up after her death, unable to look at her handwriting, unable to face the plans they'd never complete. Now he opened the first notebook with trembling hands. Sarah's handwriting flowed across the pages, neat and purposeful. Breeding charts, genetic considerations, notes about temperament, inheritance, and structural soundness. But there was something else too, a running commentary that revealed her thinking, her philosophy, her vision. Bill flipped through pages, reading passages at random, hearing Sarah's voice in every word. She'd been brilliant at this work, seeing connections and possibilities others missed. Then, 2/3 through the second notebook, he found it. A page marked with a folded letter, yellowed with age. Bill's hands shook as he opened it. The letter was addressed to him, dated 3 days before Sarah died. "My dearest Bill," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry I couldn't say these things to your face. The cancer moved faster than we thought it would, and I find myself with things left unsaid. I know what you'll do after I'm gone. You'll sell everything. You'll tell yourself you're being practical, but really you'll be running from the pain. And I don't blame you for that. Grief makes cowards of us all sometimes. But I need you to know something. The work we did together, the bloodline we built, that wasn't just business. It was art. It was legacy. It was our way of leaving something beautiful in a world that needs more beauty. I've made arrangements with my cousin Marcus. You never met him. We had a falling out years before you and I married. But he's a good man, and he understands horses. I've asked him to acquire as much of our stock as he can if you sell. He's agreed to continue the work, to maintain the bloodline with the same standards we set. Marcus will keep records. He'll mark every horse with my brand SMY, so that if they ever scatter, there will be a way to trace them back to what we built. Bill, I need you to understand. This bloodline is my legacy, yes, but more than that, it's our child, the family we never got to have in the traditional sense. Every foal born from our stock carries forward what we created together. I'm writing this letter and placing it in my notebooks because I know you won't look at them right away, maybe not for years, but I pray that someday you'll find the courage to open them again. And when you do, I want you to know that you didn't fail me by selling. You did what you needed to survive. But Bill, if fate ever brings one of our horses back to you, if you're given a second chance to be part of this legacy, please don't run from it. Please trust that some things are meant to be. Some connections don't break just because one person is gone. I loved you more than I could ever express in words. And I love you still, wherever I am now. If a horse marked with my brand ever finds its way to your door, know that I had a hand in it somehow. Know that I'm asking you, across death itself, to be brave one more time. Don't let our legacy die because I did. Don't let fear win. Be the man I fell in love with, the one who believed horses could teach us about courage and trust, and starting again. All my love, always and forever, Sarah. Bill's vision blurred. Tears he'd held back for 23 years spilled over, running down his weathered face and dripping onto the paper. His chest heaved with sobs he couldn't control, decades of grief pouring out in the silent barn, while Shadow watched with knowing eyes. Sarah had known. She'd planned for this. She'd set things in motion before she died, creating a safety net for her legacy, leaving him a message across time. And Shadow, this magnificent horse who'd arrived by accident, was exactly what she'd written about. A horse marked with her brand, a second chance. Fate or Providence or Sarah's ghost refusing to let go. Bill read the letter 3 more times, memorizing every word, hearing Sarah's voice so clearly it was almost like she was standing beside him. Then he carefully folded it and placed it in his shirt pocket over his heart. He walked to Shadow's stall. The stallion came to him immediately, sensing the shift in Bill's emotional state. Bill wrapped his arms around the powerful neck and held on, crying into Shadow's mane, while the horse stood patient and solid. "She knew," Bill whispered. "She knew I'd run. She knew I'd give up. And she loved me anyway. Enough to plan for this. Enough to make sure her work survived my cowardice." Shadow exhaled warm breath against his shoulder, comfort, acceptance, understanding. Bill straightened, wiping his face with his sleeve. The crying had left him feeling hollowed out, but clearer somehow, like a storm that clears the air. He looked at Shadow with new eyes, seeing not just a horse, but a message, a mission, a sacred trust. "I'm not giving you up," he said firmly. "I don't care what the law says. I don't care if Thornton has papers and money and lawyers. You're Sarah's legacy. You're the culmination of everything we built together. And I'm not letting you go to someone who'll never understand what you represent." Shadow's ears pricked forward, as if understanding the commitment being made. Bill pulled out his cell phone. It was 4 in the morning, but this couldn't wait. He dialed Jenny's number. She answered on the 3rd ring, voice thick with sleep. "Bill, what's wrong?" "I found something. A letter from Sarah. She arranged everything, the bloodline preservation, the brand, all of it. Jenny, she wanted this to happen. She planned for a horse to come back to me someday." Silence on the line. Then Jenny's voice, clearer now. "That changes things. It changes everything. The brand isn't just a mark. It's proof of provenance. It's Sarah's signature on her life's work. And I'm betting that gives me some legal standing. We'd need a lawyer, a good one. Tom's got connections, and I've got righteous anger and a dead wife's last wish. That's got to count for something." Jenny laughed, the sound carrying relief and excitement. "Bill Yates, are you actually going to fight?" "I'm going to fight. For Shadow, for Sarah, for everything we built and everything I gave up. I'm done running. Then let's do this properly. I'll start making calls. At a reasonable hour. We'll need documentation, breeding records, provenance, everything you can find. And that letter. That letter might be the key to everything." They talked for another 20 minutes, forming a strategy, identifying what they'd need. By the time Bill hung up, the sky was beginning to lighten toward dawn. He felt exhausted and energized simultaneously, running on purpose rather than sleep. Shadow had settled into rest, one hip cocked, eyes half closed. But he raised his head as Bill approached, as if sensing the shift in the man's energy. "We're in for a fight," Bill told him. "Thornton's not going to give you up easily. He's got law on his side. But we've got something stronger. We've got truth. And we've got Sarah watching over us." He pulled the letter from his pocket, reading it one more time in the growing light. Sarah's words felt like permission, like absolution, like a command all at once. "Don't let our legacy die, because I did." "I won't," Bill promised, speaking to his wife across the impossible distance of death. "I'm done being afraid. I'm done hiding. You gave me a second chance, and I'm taking it." Shadow nickered softly, pawing the ground. Once agreement or impatience, Bill couldn't tell. But it didn't matter. They were in this together now, bound by bloodline and brand and a love that refused to stay buried. The sun broke over the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold. It was a new day, a new beginning, and Bill Yates was finally, after 23 years, ready to fight for something that mattered. By the time Tom arrived at 7, Bill had already gathered decades of records from the filing cabinets. They covered the kitchen table, breeding charts, sale receipts, registration papers, photographs of horses going back 30 years, the documentary evidence of everything Bill and Sarah had built. Tom stood in the doorway, taking in the scene with raised eyebrows. "You weren't joking about being ready to fight. I found a letter. From Sarah." Bill's voice was steady now, grounded by purpose. "She knew I'd sell everything. She arranged for her cousin to preserve the bloodline. She left me instructions, Tom. Across 23 years, she left me instructions. He handed Tom the letter. His old friend read it slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to understanding to something that looked like relief. "I'll be damned," Tom said quietly. Sarah always was 10 steps ahead of everyone. She wanted this to happen, wanted one of her horses to come back to me someday. Shadow isn't an accident. He's an answer to a prayer I didn't know how to pray. Tom set the letter down carefully, treating it with the reverence it deserved. "All right. So what do you need from me?" "Legal help. Real legal help. Thornton's going to fight dirty, and I can't go into this with just passion and a dead wife's letter. I know someone. Margaret Chen. She's in Helena, handles property disputes and estate law. If anyone can find a legal angle here, it's her. Can you call her?" "Already did. Last night after Jenny called me. Margaret's driving down today, should be here by noon." Bill felt something in his chest loosen gratitude mixed with surprise. "You two were already planning this. Jenny's got a big mouth when she believes in something. She called me at midnight, said you'd found your spine again and needed backup." Tom smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. "I've been waiting 23 years for you to show up for yourself, Bill. I wasn't about to let logistics get in the way." They spent the morning organizing documents, building a timeline of the bloodline from its origins through Sarah's death, Marcus Webb's stewardship, and finally, to Shadow. Jenny arrived around 9 with her own research breeder contacts, bloodline verification, letters from people who'd known Sarah and respected her work. "This is solid," she said, spreading papers across what little table space remained. "You can prove continuous lineage from your original stock to Shadow. You can prove Sarah's brand was always meant as a marker of her legacy, not just property identification. And you've got her explicit instructions about what should happen to the bloodline. But does that override legal ownership?" Bill asked. "That's what Margaret will tell us. But I'll say this: moral claims matter in court sometimes, especially when combined with documented evidence of original creation and sustained legacy protection." Carlos arrived shortly after, bringing coffee and pastries nobody ate, but everyone appreciated. He stood at the edge of the organized chaos, shaking his head with something like wonder. "Never thought I'd see this kitchen look like a working ranch office again," he said. "Sarah would be proud, Bill." The words hit harder than intended. Bill had to turn away, pretending to study documents he'd already memorized. Proud. Sarah would be proud. The thought filled him with equal parts motivation and terror. What if he failed? What if all this preparation and hope led nowhere, and Shadow ended up with Thornton anyway? What if Sarah's faith in him, across death itself, turned out to be misplaced? Tom's hand on his shoulder grounded him. "One step at a time. We build the case. We present it. We see what happens. That's all anyone can do." Margaret Chen arrived at noon exactly, a woman in her 50s with steel-grey hair and eyes that assessed everything with lawyer's precision. She took in the scene, the documents, the assembled support team. Bill standing at the center, looking like a man who'd found something to fight for, and smiled slightly. "Mr. Yates, I've heard interesting things about your situation." They spent 3 hours going through everything. Margaret asked sharp questions, made notes in a leather portfolio, and occasionally pulled out her phone to verify legal precedents. Bill laid out the whole story: the mistaken delivery, the brand discovery, Jenny's research, Sarah's letter. Margaret read the letter twice, her professional mask slipping to show genuine emotion. "This is remarkable," she said finally. "Your wife was extraordinarily thoughtful. She was extraordinary in every way. The letter helps establish intent and moral claim. Combined with the brand, which you can prove predates any ownership by Thornton, and the documented lineage preservation efforts, we have the foundation of an argument." Margaret paused. "But I need to be honest with you, Mr. Yates. Legal ownership is a high bar to overcome. Thornton has purchase papers, payment records, proper bill of sale. On paper, he owns this horse." Bill felt his hope deflating. So we can't win. I didn't say that. I said the bar is high, but there are several angles we can pursue. First, the brand. If we can argue that Sarah's mark constitutes a permanent claim of artistic creation and legacy protection, similar to how an artist retains certain rights to their work even after sale, we might have standing to challenge the purchase. That's a stretch, Tom observed. It is, but stretch arguments win cases sometimes, especially when the moral clarity is on our side. Margaret made more notes. Second angle, improper sale. If Marcus Webb's estate didn't have the right to sell horses marked with Sarah's brand without seeking consent from you as her surviving spouse and partner in the original breeding work, the sale could be invalidated. Depends on how Webb's will was written, what his estate lawyer knew about the horse's provenance, and whether we can prove the estate executor had a duty to contact Mr. Yates before liquidation. Third angle? Bill asked. Third angle is the most aggressive. We argue that Sarah's bloodline constitutes intellectual property, similar to a patent or copyright. The specific genetic combinations, the breeding strategy, the documented outcomes, all of that represents creative work with measurable value. The brand is her signature on that work. Selling a branded horse without honoring the legacy intent could be seen as intellectual property violation. The room went quiet. It was audacious, creative, possibly brilliant or possibly insane. Has that ever worked in court? Carlos asked. Not with horses specifically, but there's precedent in plant breeding, in specialty livestock development. One case in Kentucky involved bourbon horses, bloodlines developed specifically for distillery use. The court recognized the breeder's intellectual property claim even after sale of individual animals. So it's possible, Bill said. It's possible. Not probable, but possible. Margaret closed her portfolio. Here's what I recommend. We file an emergency injunction preventing Thornton from taking possession until provenance and ownership can be properly established. We'll argue that removing Shadow from your property before legal review would constitute irreparable harm to both the horse and to Sarah's legacy. Will a judge grant that? Depends on the judge, but we present compelling story, documented evidence, moral clarity. And Thornton's going to look like a rich man trying to bully a widower out of his late wife's legacy. That plays well in Montana. Bill looked around the table at the people who'd shown up for him. Tom, Jenny, Carlos, Margaret. A small army assembled in defense of something bigger than one horse, bigger than one man's fight with grief. Do it, he said. File the injunction. Make the argument. Whatever it takes. Margaret nodded. I'll need a retainer. My rates aren't cheap. I'll find the money. Bill, Tom started. I said I'll find it. Sell some land if I have to. Cash in what little savings I've got. This matters more than any of that. Tom and Carlos exchanged looks. Then Carlos said, the feed store's been wanting to expand. I'll buy 5 acres on the eastern boundary. Pay premium price. Carlos, you don't need to. I know I don't need to. But Sarah was good to my father when he was starting out. Gave him credit when times were tight, never once asked for interest. This is me paying forward what she gave back then. Jenny pulled out her checkbook. Consider this a consulting fee. For all the times you've helped with difficult cases and never let me pay you properly. Bill felt his throat tighten. You don't have to do this. We know we don't have to, Tom said. We want to. That's the difference. Now stop arguing and let us help. Margaret watched this exchange with professional interest that might have been covering deeper emotion. Gentlemen, Ma'am, I appreciate the support. Let's make sure it counts. She turned to Bill. Thornton's transport is scheduled for tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Then we need to move fast. I'll file the emergency injunction this afternoon, request an expedited hearing. With luck, we'll have it granted before his truck arrives. She began packing her portfolio. Mr. Yates, I need you to understand something. Even if we get the injunction, even if we make all our arguments successfully, this could take months to resolve, maybe longer. Are you prepared for that fight? Bill thought about Sarah's letter, about the 23 years he'd spent running from everything that mattered. He thought about Shadow standing in the barn, trusting him, depending on him. "I'm prepared," he said, "for however long it takes." Margaret smiled, the first genuine warmth he'd seen from her. "Good, because Thornton's going to come at you hard. Men like him don't like being told no, especially by someone they see as beneath them. He'll try to intimidate you, buy you out, drag you through legal mud until you're too exhausted to fight. He can try. That's the spirit. Hang on to that." She stood, gathered her things. "I'll be in touch as soon as the injunction is filed. In the meantime, document everything. Every interaction with Shadow, every bit of training, every sign that this horse is responding to your specific expertise. We need to show that the relationship between you two is special, that Shadow is already bonding with you in ways he wouldn't with anyone else." After Margaret left, the others lingered, helping Bill reorganize the documents, offering quiet words of encouragement. By the time they departed in late afternoon, the kitchen looked less like chaos and more like a war room. Bill stood at the window, watching the sun descend toward the mountains. Tomorrow Thornton's truck would arrive. Tomorrow the real fight would begin. He walked to the barn. Shadow greeted him with a gentle nicker, pressing his forehead to Bill's chest in their ritual greeting. Bill wrapped his arms around the powerful neck, breathing in the warm scent of horse and hay and possibility. "We're fighting for you," he said quietly, "fighting for Sarah's dream, fighting for the second chance I don't deserve, but she gave me anyway." Shadow exhaled warmly against his chest. Trust, acceptance, partnership. Bill stayed in the barn until dark, talking to Shadow, working through movements and responses, building the evidence they'd need to prove this bond was real and irreplaceable. When he finally went to bed, he slept deeply for the first time in years, the sleep of a man who'd found his purpose again, who'd stopped running from the past and started fighting for the future. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, but tonight Bill Yates rested in the certainty that he was finally, after all these years, doing exactly what Sarah would have wanted him to do. He was showing up. He was fighting. He was alive again. The transport truck arrived at 7:50, 10 minutes early. Bill had been awake since 4, watching the dawn break over the valley, steeling himself for what was coming. Tom sat beside him on the porch, both men holding coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "Margaret filed the injunction," Tom said quietly. "Got confirmation at 6 this morning. Judge approved it on emergency basis. So they can't take him. Not legally. But whether they try anyway, that's another question." The truck pulled up the drive, larger than the one that had delivered Shadow 3 weeks ago. Professional operation, meant for moving expensive animals. Behind it came a black SUV with tinted windows. Bill stood, his jaw set, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. This was it, the moment everything changed or stayed the same. 3 men climbed out of the vehicles. 2 were hired, help, truck driver and handler, young and professional. The third was obviously Thornton himself. 60 years old maybe, wearing expensive ranch wear that had never seen actual ranch work. Polished boots, designer hat, the bearing of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. "Mr. Yates?" Thornton's voice carried authority and impatience in equal measure. "That's me, Gerald Thornton. I believe we spoke on the phone. I'm here to collect my property." "I'm afraid there's been a complication." Thornton's expression hardened. "I'm not interested in complications. I have legal ownership of that stallion, and I've driven 3 hours to collect him. So if you'll just have him loaded, we can all get on with our day." Bill pulled the folded injunction from his pocket. "You need to read this." Thornton took it with visible irritation, scanned it quickly, then read it more carefully. His face darkened. "This is ridiculous. You can't claim ownership based on a brand that predates my purchase. The brand doesn't predate your purchase. It predates any purchase. It's my late wife's mark on a bloodline she developed. That horse is part of her legacy. That horse is mine. I paid for him. I have documentation. Thornton pulled his own papers from inside his jacket. Bill of sale, registration transfer, everything legal and proper. From an estate that didn't have the right to sell him. Not without consulting me as Sarah's surviving spouse and partner in the original breeding work. That's not how law works, Mr. Yates. Maybe not. But that's what we're going to find out in court. Tom stepped forward, his deputy marshal badge visible on his belt. He didn't say anything, just stood there as a quiet reminder that this situation was being monitored by law enforcement. Thornton noticed, his jaw tightening. You're making a mistake. I'm a reasonable man, but I don't appreciate being manipulated or delayed. That stallion represents a significant investment, and I intend to protect that investment. He's not an investment, Bill said, his voice steady but carrying heat. He's a living legacy. He's the culmination of 30 years of careful breeding and dedication. My wife's brand on his hide means something more than property marking. It means he's part of something bigger than your bank account. Spare me the sentiment. This is business. To you, maybe. To me, it's family. Thornton studied Bill with calculating eyes. All right, let's be practical. Name your price. What will it take for you to end this charade and let me leave with my horse? He's not for sale. Everything's for sale at the right price. 50,000 over what I paid. That's my offer. No. 75,000. That's more than generous for a horse you've had for 3 weeks. I said no. Thornton's veneer of civility cracked. Then you're a fool. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers who'll drag this out until you're bankrupt from legal fees. I'll make sure this case destroys you financially, even if you somehow win. Bill met his eyes without flinching. Then you do what you have to do. But you're not taking that horse today, tomorrow, or any day until a court says you can. And I'm praying that when a judge hears the whole story, they're going to see what I see. A rich man trying to bully a working man out of his dead wife's legacy. The silence stretched taut. Thornton's hands clenched at his sides. For a moment Bill thought he might actually try to force his way into the barn. Then Tom shifted slightly, a subtle reminder of his presence, and Thornton stepped back. This isn't over, he said coldly. Not by a long shot. You've just made an enemy you can't afford, Mr. Yates. I've already lost what mattered most, Bill said quietly. You can't threaten me with anything worse than what I've already survived. Thornton climbed back into his SUV. The hired help loaded into the truck, confused, but following orders. The vehicles pulled away, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Bill's legs went weak. He sat down hard on the porch steps, his hands shaking now that the confrontation was over. Tom sat beside him. You did good, did I? I just made a powerful enemy and committed to a fight I might not win. Yeah, but you showed up for it. That's what matters. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. Sarah would be proud. The words hit deep. Bill closed his eyes, feeling the morning sun on his face, hearing Shadow's distant nicker from the barn. I hope so, he whispered. God, I hope so. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal motions, depositions, and mounting tension. Thornton did exactly what he'd threatened, came at Bill with everything he had. High-powered lawyers filed motion after motion, trying to dismiss the case, trying to force immediate transfer of Shadow, trying to bury Bill in paperwork and procedure. But Margaret Chen proved formidable. She countered every move, built arguments that gained traction with the judge, and slowly, painstakingly, established that this case was about more than simple property rights. Bill spent his days working with Shadow, documenting every training session, every breakthrough, every sign of the unique bond forming between them. Jenny came by twice a week to provide veterinary assessments, noting in professional terms what Bill felt in his heart. Shadow was thriving under his care in ways that went beyond simple maintenance. The stallion had transformed. The wariness had dissolved into trust. The barely contained wildness had evolved into focused intelligence. Shadow responded to Bill with a partnership that couldn't be faked or fabricated. They'd become a team. This is remarkable, Jenny said one afternoon, watching them work through complex maneuvers in the paddock. The level of communication between you two, I've seen it maybe twice in my career. This isn't just training. This is genuine connection. Bill brought Shadow to a halt with barely a shift of his weight. The stallion stood calm, breathing easily, ears forward. He's teaching me as much as I'm teaching him. What's he teaching you? Bill was quiet for a moment, running his hand down Shadow's powerful neck. That it's never too late. That the past can become the future if you're brave enough to bridge the gap. That Sarah's love didn't die with her, it just took a different form. Jenny's eyes glistened. You should say that in court. I'm not good with words. You're better than you think. The hearing was set for a Wednesday morning in early summer. 4 months after Shadow had first arrived, Bill wore his best clothes, the suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, now slightly tight around the shoulders, but still serviceable. Tom drove him to the courthouse, neither man saying much, both understanding the weight of what was coming. The courtroom was smaller than Bill expected, wood-paneled and solemn. Thornton sat with his team of lawyers, looking confident and expensive. Margaret sat at the defense table, her materials organized with characteristic precision. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, Judge Patricia Whitmore, known for fairness and impatience with legal nonsense. She reviewed the case materials with careful attention, then looked up at both parties. "This is an unusual case," she said. "Property rights are typically straightforward, but Mr. Yates's legal team has raised questions that deserve consideration. I've read the briefs, studied the evidence, and I'm prepared to hear final arguments." Thornton's lead attorney spoke first, a smooth presentation about legal ownership, proper purchase procedures, the importance of respecting contractual agreements. It was professional, precise, and completely without heart. Then Margaret stood. She didn't use legal jargon or complex arguments. Instead, she told a story. Sarah's story, Bill's story, Shadow's story. She presented the bloodline documentation, the brand's history, Marcus Webb's deliberate preservation efforts. She read portions of Sarah's letter aloud in the quiet courtroom. Bill watched Judge Whitmore's face as she listened, saw something shift in her expression, professional distance giving way to human connection. Finally, Margaret called Bill to the stand. "Mr. Yates, tell the court what this horse means to you." Bill's hands gripped the edges of the witness box. He looked at Thornton, at the judge, at the handful of observers in the gallery. Then he spoke from the heart. "Shadow isn't just a horse. He's my wife, reaching across death to remind me that our work mattered, that the legacy we built together didn't end when she died. For 23 years, I ran from everything we created because it hurt too much to face it. But Shadow arrived by accident, by fate, by Sarah's planning, and gave me a second chance to honor what we built together." His voice cracked slightly. "I'm 66 years old. I don't have unlimited years left. But whatever time I have, I want to spend it continuing Sarah's work, not for profit, not for show, but because she trusted me to carry forward what we started together. Shadow is that bridge between past and future. He's proof that love doesn't die, it just transforms." The courtroom was silent. Even Thornton's lawyers seemed uncertain how to counter raw honesty. Judge Whitmore studied Bill for a long moment, then reviewed her notes. "I'm prepared to rule. This court finds that while Mr. Thornton has legal documentation of purchase, the provenance of this animal, specifically the brand placed by Mrs. Sarah Yates, constitutes a form of creative and intellectual legacy that was not properly conveyed in the estate sale. The court further finds that Mr. Yates, as surviving spouse and partner in the original breeding work, has standing to claim custodial rights over this specific bloodline." She looked directly at Thornton. "Mr. Thornton, you'll be compensated for your purchase price, plus reasonable expenses. But Shadow remains with Mr. Yates. This horse goes home." Bill felt his knees go weak. Tom gripped his shoulder from behind, steadying him. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "this court recognizes Mrs. Yates's brand as a protected mark of artistic and intellectual legacy. Any horses bearing that brand must be offered first to Mr. Yates or his designees before being sold to third parties. The gavel came down. It was over. Shadow was his. Sarah's legacy was protected. The second chance was real. 6 months later, Bill stood at the paddock fence watching Shadow move across the summer grass with effortless grace. The stallion had filled out, his coat gleaming in the afternoon sun, every line of him speaking to the careful breeding and patient training that had shaped him. Behind Bill, the barn showed signs of renewal. Fresh paint on the doors, repaired fences. 3 new stalls occupied by mares carefully selected from what remained of Sarah's scattered bloodline, brought home through the legal protections Judge Whitmore had granted. Yates' quarter horses was operating again. Not at the scale it once had, but with the same heart, the same dedication to temperament and intelligence over flash and profit. Bill had discovered that at 66, he still had the gift, maybe even more so, tempered by loss and patience, and the wisdom that comes from walking through fire. Jenny's truck pulled into the drive. She climbed out with her medical bag, joined him at the fence. "How's he doing?" "Perfect. Watch this." Bill gave a subtle whistle. Shadow's head came up immediately, ears forward. Bill gestured once, and the stallion cantered over, stopping precisely at the fence, with barely a command given. "Show off," Jenny said, but she was smiling. She ran her hands over Shadow with professional efficiency, checking vitals, looking for any sign of problems. "He's in exceptional condition. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I'm just listening to what he needs." Same as Sarah used to do. They walked back toward the house. The kitchen table was covered with breeding charts and potential matches. Sarah's old notebooks, open beside modern printouts, past informing present. Bill had spent countless hours studying her notes, understanding her thinking, carrying forward her vision with his own hands. "Tom stopped by yesterday," Bill said, pouring coffee. "Said the Henderson Ranch is interested in breeding their mare with Shadow next spring. That's excellent. Henderson's stock is solid. Sarah would be pleased. She always respected their operation." Bill sat, cradling the warm mug. "Sometimes I catch myself thinking about telling her, like she's just in the other room. Then I remember, but it doesn't hurt the way it used to. Because you're honoring her properly now, keeping her alive through the work. Maybe, or maybe I'm just finally accepting that she's gone, but what we built together doesn't have to be." Carlos arrived around dinner time, bringing a bottle of decent whiskey and steaks for the grill. Tom showed up shortly after. The 3 men sat on the porch as the sun descended, the valley turning gold and purple, Shadow visible in the distance like a black silhouette against the grass. "Remember when this place was dead silent?" Tom said. "When you'd sit out here alone every night like you were waiting to die? I remember. Look at it now. Horses in the barn, people coming by, life happening again." Tom raised his glass. "To Sarah, for refusing to let you give up, even from the grave." They drank. Bill felt the familiar warmth, but it didn't carry the weight of grief anymore. It carried gratitude. "I've been thinking," Bill said slowly, "about taking on an apprentice. Someone young, who wants to learn proper training." Jenny mentioned her nephew, 22, fresh out of ag school, more interested in partnership with horses than domination. "You'd be a hell of a teacher," Carlos said. "I'd be passing it forward. The way Sarah taught me. The way her knowledge deserves to continue beyond just me." They talked late into the night, the way friends do when they're celebrating something bigger than they can articulate. Eventually Tom and Carlos left, and Bill walked out to the barn for his final check of the evening. Shadow greeted him with a gentle nicker, pushing his head against Bill's chest in their ritual greeting. Bill wrapped his arms around the powerful neck, breathing in the familiar scent. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "You know that? You arrived by mistake and saved my life." Shadow exhaled warmly, patient and present. Bill pulled Sarah's letter from his pocket. He carried it everywhere now, worn soft from handling. He didn't need to read it anymore. He'd memorized every word. But he liked having it close, this tangible proof that love transcended death, that planning and hope could reach across impossible distances. "I did what you asked," he said to Sarah's ghost, "to the stars, to the universe. I was brave. I showed up. I'm living again instead of just existing. A breeze moved through the valley, carrying the scent of grass and horses and possibility. Bill could almost hear Sarah's laugh in it, could almost feel her approval in the way Shadow leaned against him. He stayed in the barn until dark, then walked back to the house. The kitchen light spilled warm across the porch. Inside, Sarah's photograph still sat on the refrigerator, but Bill had added others now: Shadow, the new mares, Tom and Jenny and Carlos. The house was coming back to life. Before bed, Bill sat at the kitchen table and opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, he wrote, "Shadow's first season, breeding plans and observations." Below that, in smaller letters, "Continuing Sarah's work." His handwriting wasn't as neat as hers had been. His breeding strategy wouldn't be as intuitive, but he'd do his best. He'd show up every day, learn from his mistakes, and honor her legacy with every decision. That was what second chances asked of you: not perfection, but presence. Not flawless execution, but honest effort. Not forgetting the past, but integrating it into a future that honored what came before while creating something new. Bill turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to bed. The bedroom didn't feel as empty anymore. He carried Sarah with him now in a different way, not as a weight of grief, but as a foundation of love that supported everything he built moving forward. He slept deeply, dreamlessly, the sleep of a man who'd found his way back to purpose. And in the barn, Shadow rested peacefully, the brand on his neck catching moonlight through the window, 3 letters that meant everything. S-M-Y, Sarah Marie Yates. A legacy that refused to die. A love that bridged death itself. A second chance delivered by fate to a man who'd finally become brave enough to accept it. Some mistakes, it turned out, carried the weight of destiny. And sometimes what arrived unannounced was exactly what you needed most, even if it took 23 years to understand why.